The Shaping of Gondor, Part 4, The Line of Calmakiel. Chapter 1, The Gathering Storm. With Narmakiel dead without issue, the throne passed quietly to his younger brother Calmakiel, the father of the regent Minalcar. Calmakiel, however, was a venerable 236 years old by the time of his accession, had been lame from birth, and was now nearly blind. Although he had been a scholar of some ability in his youth, he could not hope to rule under such conditions, and well he knew it. He hastened to confirm his son Minalcar in his regency. The regent did not have to wait long. In Narier of 1304, Calmakiel died after a 10-year reign, and Minalcar at last became king in his own right. In honor of his victory over the Easterlings decades earlier, he was christened as Romendacil II, the title we must now refer to him by as well. By the time of his succession to the throne in his own name, Romendacil II had of course already long been the guiding authority in the realm, and so his assumption of the White Throne meant little in the way of change for his subjects. All the old taxes were continued, all the old duties were renewed, and able government proceeded unabated. Indeed, in comparison with the war-racked years of the Regency, the titular reign of Romendacil II was a rather eventless time, the last such period of serenity, as it turned out, that Gondor was to know for a very long while. Rather than politics, taxes, or martial affairs occupying the bulk of the king's attention, it was the matter of the succession which increasingly dominated both the court and the table talk among most common people during these decades. The point at issue was the king's son Valacar, and by extension his grandson Eldacar. It came about in this way. In 1250, when Valacar was dispatched to the kingdom of the Northmen, he had not then been his father's heir. An elder brother named Valarion preceded him in the line of succession, a fact which had soothed Romendacil's misgivings about sending his second-born to a faraway barbarian court. Likewise, when Valacar's own first son was born 5 years later, it presented little trouble at first, since the child stood so far out of line for the throne. It was taken for granted that Valarion would in time succeed his father, his own heirs would succeed him, and so on. All would be well. That, however, was not the way things turned out. In 1326, Valarion took ill after an overindulgent drinking bout, and died. He left no children. This made second son Valacar the new heir, and the situation was altered dramatically. Valacar would now almost certainly be king after Romendacil. That meant his own son Eldacar would likewise one day sit upon the White Throne. However, the law was clear enough. None belonging to the royal house of Anarion could legally wed or sire children with any outside the bloodline of Numenor. Nor was it simply a matter of legality. Allies or not, the Northmen were held to be a crude, common race, without either the learning or the grace of the native Gondorians. Their clothes and manners were coarse, their lives short in comparison with those of the Edain. They did not either know or venerate the deities of the Valar. Who knew, therefore, what the mingling of such low heritage with that of the line of Anarion might have on the royal house? Might not the descendants of any such union lose the longevity which had until now marked the Anarioni above ordinary men? It could therefore be plausibly argued that in wedding Vidumavi, the prince had violated both the laws and customs of the land, and had thus invalidated any claim on the part of his sons to the crown of Gondor. Many nobles in the realm from 1326 onward began to raise this point, privately at first, then more openly. Then in 1332, Princess Vidumavi, who had taken the Gondorian name of Galithwen, died. She was about 100 years of age at the time, quite exceptional by the reckoning of the Northmen, but paltry compared to the lifespans of the House of Anarion. This only further strengthened the arguments of conservative Gondorians, who now nervously watched Eldacar for signs of premature decrepitude. Nor was there any hope of natural deliverance in the form of further royal heirs, since Valacar steadfastly refused to remarry. By 1344, controversy over Prince Valacar's succession had reached such proportions that Romendacil II felt impelled to convoke the Council of Gondor, the fifth, in Osgiliath. There, arrayed in the full panoply of his royal office, and exerting the full force of his still imposing presence, the king made it clear that, foreign wife or not, Valacar was his heir, and mixed blood or not, Eldacar was his. Furthermore, he declared that he would brook no further questioning of Valacar's right to the crown, and that any who persisted in doing so would face his wrath. He had defeated the Easterlings. He had raised the Argonath. He had almost single-handedly wrenched the kingdom out of 100 years of inertia. He was not going to have his authority questioned by a few arrogant nobles. It worked, at least for the moment. Under Romendacil's stern gaze, all in attendance duly knelt and swore to acknowledge Valacar's accession, and to serve him without defiance. The council then adjourned, and with the king victorious in his purpose of putting the succession to rest, officially anyway. Notwithstanding councils and oaths, though, there remained no shortage of resentment and grumbling among both the nobility and populace over the heritage of their future monarch, particularly in the southern and coastal provinces. Like a smoldering bed of coals, this malcontent would simmer during the preceding decades, growing slowly worse with every passing year as Romendacil's death approached and his faculties dimmed. There is a story according to which, in the twilight years of his reign, Romendacil ventured to Minas Ithil to consult the oracle of Mandos. When he queried to know the fate of his kingdom following his death, the sage replied mysteriously, "By thy blood's pride shall thy dominion be sundered, and by its courage shall it yet be saved." This portent, no doubt, was of mixed consolation to the declining king, as he sat in the palace in Osgiliath awaiting the end. Romendacil II, having done all he could, at last let go of life in Yavanye of 1366, after having governed the Gondorian dominion for 126 years, between his regency and titular reign. Through his indefatigable drive, he had defended the realm, emerged as the victor over all his enemies, and healed the hurts of his predecessor's follies. Few of Gondor's rulers had ever matched his vigor. None matched his genius in the multifold arts of kingship. In only one way did he do his subjects a disservice: by breaking with tradition and consenting to his second son's union to a barbarian princess. He had opened the door to suspicion and discontent among the peoples of the realm. Then, by his adamant forcing through of Valacar as his heir, he all but assured its eventual descent into chaos and bloodshed, as, alas, we shall soon see. Valacar, 172 years old at his accession to the White Throne, was no fool. To his counselors and ministers he gave a prudent and thoughtful ear, and to his captains a firm and decisive hand, not unlike that of his deceased father. Tall, slender, and still quite handsome in middle age, he cut a gracious figure indeed. His travels in Rovanien and Eriador, in his capacity as Romendacil's emissary, had given him an education and worldliness rare for a Gondorian prince. On the basis of these admittedly noble virtues, he is sometimes known as Valacar the Bold in the history scrolls. Like Romendacil, however, his great and fatal flaw was an over-attachment to family, particularly to his beloved son and heir Eldacar. To any criticism or questioning of the prince's right to the succession, Valacar to the end turned a sullen and hostile ear, and in doing so helped set the stage for the first of a series of disasters, which were to bring his kingdom low and undo all the achievements of his father and the Ship Kings. At first, though, it looked as though everything might work out after all. As king, Valacar faithfully maintained all of his father's wise policies of government. The tournaments in Osgiliath proceeded with much panoply, the frontiers remained safely manned, and the royal ledgers continued to be carefully balanced. Moreover, As the years slipped by, Prince Eldacar showed no sign of aging any more quickly than his father or grandfather, something which allayed the fears of many in the realm, especially among the common folk and priesthood, and so the matter simmered quietly under the surface for a while. Yet, through a convergence of circumstances, the suspicion and prejudice of the southern lords of the empire, the stubbornness of the king, and blind chance, the greater part of Valacar's reign proved to be little more than a slow march towards disaster. The early rumblings had begun, as we have seen, in the previous reign in the form of idle court gossip and utterances in the streets and town squares of the realm. Now, under Valacar, things were taken a step further. In 1368, a number of the most powerful and prominent southern nobles, including the demivirs of Umbar, Harad, and Harondor, as well as the Crondirs of Belfalas and Lebanon, signed their names to a petition, exhorting the king to disinherit his son Eldacar on the grounds of his foreign blood, and will the throne to a collateral member of the royal family. This Valacar naturally refused to do, contemptuously dismissing the request as the cowardly act of a band of hypocritical snobs, none of whom had any qualms about bedding barbarians and siring children by them in their own houses. The royal rebukes, however much they might have stung the recalcitrant lord's pride, did not dissuade them in their purpose, and the petitions and protests continued with the years. By 1381 the king had had enough. In Lotissay of that year, he called together all the grandees of the realm to him in Osgiliath, and there forced them to acknowledge Prince Eldacar's legitimacy, as well as to swear oaths to accept his accession in due course. Once again, as with Romendacil II, the lords obeyed the king in the open, and while he lived, but remained rebellious in their thoughts. Even then, things might have resolved themselves peaceably, had the king gone about governing the realm in a manner absent of any hint of favoritism, or had there been no obvious alternative to the succession. Neither, unfortunately, was the case. Valacar, it seems, was unable to resist his fondness for the kinsman of his dead wife Vidumavi, and from about 1381 onward began to allow many of their number to settle in the imperial dominion. Most made their homes in the northern provinces, where they slowly bred and intermixed with the native populations. This was not especially untoward on its own, but the king took matters further by allowing some of their number to serve in his councils and take places of considerable influence at his court. This, of course, only kindled the resentment of the lords further, as it seemed that their own power and prominence in the realm was being diminished in favor of a group of lowly barbarian upstarts. Complicating things further was the dynastic situation. King Romendacil II had had a younger brother named Kalimatar, who had been an idle, pleasure-loving nonentity during his far more capable elder brother's reign, and had played no role of importance whatsoever. Kalimatar had died in 1344, but he had left behind a son, Calamer, who became Lord of Pelargir and the foremost admiral in the kingdom. A vain and arrogant man, he quickly emerged as the most eminent of Valacar's detractors, and he missed no chance to tarnish his royal cousin's standing in the minds and hearts of the Gondorian people. To be sure, in 1403 Calamer died in a mishap, but his title and disposition were inherited by his son, Castamir. As the grandnephew of Romendacil II, Castamir's claim to the throne was somewhat more distant than that of his cousin Eldacar. However, it was purely Gondorian in lineage, whereas Eldacar's was not. Naturally, then, he swiftly succeeded his father as the preeminent figure among those in opposition to Eldacar's succession. By the time of Calamer's death, Valacar's rule was rapidly degenerating into chaos, as the by now aging monarch vainly attempted to address the calamity that he saw now approaching. In 1410, and then again in 1419, he felt impelled to replace all the demivirs of the provinces with men whom he felt more assured of the loyalty of, with regard to the succession. This was not entirely unjustified. In 1413, a treacherous attempt was made on Eldacar's life in Pelargir, whilst he was on a visit there on his father's behalf, and a second followed 3 years later. Clearly, this boded ill for the future relationship of the prince and his future subjects. Even abroad, the situation in wider Middle-earth seemed to be unraveling. In 1409, 2 of the petty kingdoms of the Edain, Cardolan and Rodaur, had fallen prey to invasion at the hands of the rising power of the neighboring realm of Angmar, and had been overrun. Only Arthedain now remained of the kingdom of Elendil the Tall, thus immersing Eriador further into poverty and lawlessness, as well as removing a valuable bulwark on Gondor's northwestern borders. King Valacar, entangled with his quarrels with his vassals over the succession, could naturally do little but watch these happenings with dismay. In 1429, with death approaching, the king compelled his lords, for the second time, to swear fealty and loyalty to Eldacar. Once again, as before, all promised, but few were sincere in their vow. As if to demonstrate this, when yearly taxes came due in 1430, the Crondiers of both Belfalas and Lebanon chose instead to revolt against the king, and there followed a number of nasty riots and demonstrations in Pelargir and Dol Mirathas. Although Valacar at first attempted to conciliate the malcontents, he soon turned to harsher measures when the latter vindictively demanded his abdication. The governors of the other southern dominions made similar threatening motions, goaded on by their barbarian, despising southerly cohorts. It was whilst still attempting to bring his proud lordlings to heel that King Valacar the Bold died, on 15 Ringare of 1432. To the end, he had worked hard, and done his best to order the seven heartlands justly. Unhappily, however, his unshakable devotion to his family cancelled out all of his efforts, and with his death, the storm which had been gathering ever since his marriage to Vidumavi finally broke in full force.